When KJ Adams is off the floor, yes, unequivocally, the offensive ceiling for KU is higher with no KJ Adams. But the defensive floor seemingly appears to be significantly lower with KJ Adams off the floor.
Okay.
And those are two very important things.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
Pay heed, all who enter, and beware this podcast. That's right, this is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. Of course, I'm here with my good friend, Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. And today we're going to be talking a lot of KU basketball as Kansas beats K-State in a bit of a ho-hum type of game, I guess you would call it. So we'll talk about that. KU's got a trip to TCU coming up, and then a big game coming up on Saturday against Houston back at Allen Fieldhouse that we may be touching on as well. So that's what's coming up on today's show. Of course, if you like what you are listening to, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe, drop a comment, share your thoughts, leave us a 5-star rating and review. We are getting so close to 500 subscribers on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, so you can subscribe over there for video portions of the shows and also exclusive content as well on our YouTube channel. Very quickly, Kevin, before we dive too deeply into KU on the basketball side, I did think it was worth mentioning here to start the show some big news for KU volleyball, which was they had the retirement of Ray Bouchard announced earlier about a couple of weeks ago. And that started their coaching search, and they got a pretty impressive name in Matt Ulmer from Oregon, who was the head coach at Oregon, had led them to, I believe it was 7 straight NCAA tournament appearances. He's been to the Elite Eight 3 times, and KU actually was knocked out by Oregon, I believe, in the NCAA tournament at one point with Ulmer as the head coach. He comes over to the same position at KU. So just real quickly, I just wanted to sort of touch on this, that Travis Goff, man, he continues to do very, very impressive work in terms of bringing really high profile, I would say, high profile coaches to Lawrence. You think about the Dan Fitzgerald hiring for the KU baseball team, obviously Lance Leipold, and now you add Matt Ulmer, who is a proven commodity. And again, a guy coming from a head coaching position at Oregon to come to KU and Lawrence, that's pretty impressive stuff. So I wanted to give a quick shout out to Travis Goff and the KU volleyball program before we get started on the show today.
Yeah, for sure. And you look at the success that KU has had and the consistent success here recently, especially under Coach Bouchard, and obviously deserves all the credit in the world. I know they rolled him out at the K-State game, and he was able to get some love from the fans, which was really cool. And now you have to think that Ulmer, with the success that he's found, has a chance to keep that thing rolling and potentially even go even further in the NCAA tournament, because KU's obviously done really well. They've, I don't want to say disappointing is the wrong word for it, but they've had a couple teams that maybe you thought could maybe go a little bit further in the tournament, get chopped down maybe a round or two early. It'll be interesting to see if Ulmer can find a little bit more success in the postseason than they've had the last couple of years.
But with a hiring like this, bringing over a head coach from another Power 4 school, especially a school like Oregon, who I'm sure if they wanted to keep him could probably, ask Phil Knight for some money or something.
Yeah,
come over to Lawrence. I think that cements this volleyball program for KU as probably a top 25 program nationally, I think, and hopefully that can continue to trend upwards. So big shout out to them, and looking forward to their continued growth under their new head coach as well. So let's pivot to this KU K-State game on Saturday afternoon now in Fieldhouse. We learned on Friday KJ Adams not going to play in the game. That's kind of where I want to start. I think that's probably the biggest storyline of this game for KU is no KJ Adams in the game for Kansas. They end up winning 84-74. You get off to the incredibly blazing hot start. You're up 14-0. You're thinking, all right, this K-State team is terrible. Let's just dog walk them to a 40-point win. And listen, credit to K-State. They fought back. KU at that point, I think kind of even Hunter Dickinson said himself post-game, like, we kind of took our foot off the gas a little bit and, maybe didn't really fully try to just put them away. And so that kind of led to this kind of back and forth game of, you get it back up to 13 in the second half, but K-State's always kind of within 10. They actually end up cutting it to 6 with like 4 minutes left in the game, and you're thinking, okay, like sure. And then KU ends up winning by 10. But no KJ Adams in this game. Kevin, what was kind of your takeaway from how KU played without him? Because Bill Self did mention that this could be sort of a potential week-to-week injury. So we could be looking at some extended time where KU may need to play without KJ Adams.
Yeah, you saw some really weird lineups, right? And sometimes that happens when you're trying to find something when one of the pillars of what you're doing is out. And you look at, one of our worries was if you started Flory next to Hunter Dickinson, which was the decision they wound up going with, what happens if Flory winds up getting into early foul trouble? Then, you're really behind the 8 ball from a foul standpoint at the center spot. Flory, to his credit, did a great job of avoiding getting into foul trouble early, did get into some late. You wound up seeing kind of some interesting lineups with like AJ Storr in certain spots. Rakeese Passmore was in at one point. Rylan Griffin was another guy. And so you saw a lot of moving pieces. And I thought, for all the talk about taking their foot off the gas, I thought the main thing that kind of kept K-State in it when maybe they were wobbling early was Kansas kind of had some weird lineups out there, and lineups that you felt like, even without the benefit of hindsight, hey, this is a lineup that could struggle a little bit. They haven't played together a whole lot. In some cases, you were wondering where the scoring was going to come from. Overall, though, Nick, both of our predictions, we had the point total being way lower than 84 for Kansas. And so the offense, and that's been one of the complaints when you've had KJ Adams playing a lot of minutes, is the spacing isn't always great. The offense isn't always great. After the game, Bill Self talked about the fact that defensively they weren't good, and they were basically trying to hold on, at certain points defensively. And obviously that's where KJ Adams' strength is. And it's not just as an individual defender. We've talked about it on the show. It's as a team defender as well. He does a great job in those scramble drills of being able to help out when Hunter Dickinson comes out and hedges. He does a great job of rallying back and rotating. And so they're going to miss that for a little bit, especially as guys figure things out. The other thing, Nick, that, we kind of talked about before we got on the show, we didn't get the score predictions right, but if you watched the last show, we said, do not be surprised if this is not an absolute blowout, if it is one of those games where K-State just kind of hangs around and you wind up winning by about 10 points or so. And we compared it to the Missouri game from a year ago, where Missouri had kind of everything to play for. It wasn't a great Missouri team. Kansas kind of, tiptoed around a little bit, and it wound up being closer than you would have wanted it to be. Same thing kind of happened here. To your point, though, Kansas never really let it get to a spot where you were worried. I don't feel like K-State never got closer than 6. KU got off to a 14-0 run, and K-State never got closer than 6 the rest of the way. And so they kind of kept them in arm's length for the most part, and K-State wasn't able to close that gap. But at the same time, it did kind of play out that way, where you had one team that did seem like it was kind of looking at the clock and waiting for the clock to run out, and you had another team that was maybe scrapping it at a little bit higher level at times.
Yeah, and look, I mean, this is kind of what I want to get into with the KJ Adams discussion. Is he's obviously been a lightning rod for conversation around KU, for the better part of the season. We certainly talked about him quite a bit. Yeah. And here was kind of my takeaways. When KJ Adams is off the floor, yes, unequivocally, the offensive ceiling for KU is higher with no KJ Adams. But the defensive floor seemingly appears to be significantly lower with KJ Adams off the floor.
Okay.
And those are two very important things, because you look at this K-State team, Kevin. K-State had not scored more than 70 points since December 17th. They are 109th in KenPom. This is a very average offense, an offense that is not really very good. And we know about their struggles that they've had. And they came into this game against KU, and to be honest with you, they missed a lot of open shots. Like, they probably could have been even better. They were pretty effective from 2-point range. They missed a lot of threes, which really hurt them. And so, yeah, I mean, I think if you're Bill Self, you're looking at this game saying, gosh, sure, if AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin play to their full potential, like, the offensive ceiling could be higher for this KU team with KJ Adams on the bench, or obviously in this case not playing due to injury. But the defensive floor becomes way lower for this team, right? And I think it's pretty clear that Bill Self wants this year's team to be a more defensive focused team, right? Like, he's kind of made some comments that I think give me the impression that that's kind of what he's looking for, and which is part of the reason why, he made the comments about KJ Adams being the best player for KU over the past 4 games before the injuries, because he certainly seemingly plays an integral part in Kansas being a very effective defensive team. So I think that's where you try to find this balance of, hey, look, if AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin are playing to their full potential, yes, maybe this team can go out and be, a top offensive team. But the bottom line is, neither one of them have really done that to this point in the season, right? So if your offensive ceiling is way up here, but your guys aren't playing to that level, and then your defensive floor is lowered so significantly because those guys are on the floor, that's kind of, I think, the juggling act that you're dealing with if you're Bill Self at this point. And Kevin, I don't know about you, but like, I think this game, and maybe we'll see over the next couple games if KJ Adams continues to be out, like, I think his importance is probably going to be spotlighted even more if KU continues to struggle, defensively or in other areas.
Yeah, and we talked about after the North Carolina game how in that game KU felt like they were one guard defender short, right? Where Carolina was always able to attack the guy that wasn't, DeJuan Harris or Rylan Griffin at times. And I think in this one, you were at times, one defender short. And you look at, they did a great job with Brendan Howson. The guys getting the open threes, generally it wasn't Howson. And they did a good job of chasing him, making sure he didn't get good looks. I thought the help defense was maybe a little over-exaggerated. You had guys kind of flying in at positions they didn't really have to. Coleman Hawkins would get the ball with his back to the basket at 16 feet. He's not dangerous there, right? He's not even facing the basket. So you don't necessarily need to send help in that situation. And there were a couple times where they got burned, where they were sending extra help and leaving guys open where they were able to attack. And you made a really good point. K-State scored 74 points. K-State had a lot of open looks that they did not knock down. Like, it was this was a game that if it were a team that was a better shooting team or a better offensive team, they could have put up 90 in this game with the way that Kansas defended. And so I agree with you on all of that. Rylan Griffin didn't really look like himself. I thought was kind of passive. You don't want to make any assumptions or anything like that. This is the time of year, though, as you know, that a lot of guys are getting sick and things like that. I thought Rylan Griffin kind of looked like a guy that maybe wasn't feeling the best. As weird as that sounds, like it was just his mannerisms and things like that. AJ Storr winds up being a -11, and plus minus doesn't tell you everything, but nobody was even close to a -11. And AJ Storr was a -11 in the 17 minutes that he got out there. Again, he got 17 minutes, but at some point, you really have to make the most of those 17 minutes. And to your point, he either has to defend at a level to where the thing that you talked about with the defensive floor being lowered to where the defensive floor isn't lowered as much when he's out there, or he needs to do a better job attacking. Right now, Nick, he's not really doing either. And that's it. You don't want to say, hey, this isn't going to work out. But at some point, when you do get 17 minutes, when you do get 20 minutes, when you get whatever you're going to get, it is up to the player to ultimately, do what he's out there to do. And AJ Storr didn't do that against Kansas State.
Well, that's the other thing that somewhat alarmed me about this game, Kevin, is no KJ Adams, and then you end up starting with both Flory and Hunter on the floor at the same time, which, again, I think we've reiterated those two guys on the floor at the same time, I think you and I are both in agreement. We really like that, right? But
Yeah.
it's just not something you can utilize, for an extended period of time, given KU's, depth at the big man position. And then you take away KJ Adams, and now you really have nobody, right? Like it's those two guys, and that's it. So now you're really rolling the dice with those guys if they're on the floor for extended minutes, because you're going to run into an issue of who you're going to sub in, right? Zach Clements is still hurt. Now you don't have KJ Adams either. You're looking at literally AJ Storr would be your 5, I guess. Like he's the next tallest guy on the floor at that point that you could even bring on the floor. But you mentioned with AJ Storr his plus minus, and it really wasn't just him, Kevin. The entire bench in this game for KU really struggled, which was really concerning, right? AJ Storr ends up playing 17 minutes. You mentioned Rylan Griffin, 12. You only get 5 minutes from Marquise Passmore. David Coit gets out there very briefly and then is yanked immediately. But we talked so much about last year and how, the main issue was, look, your starters ended up playing 35 minutes a game, night in, night out. And by the time you got into February and March, right, Kevin McCullers hurt. Hunter Dickinson was dealing with injuries the whole season, right? DeJuan Harris couldn't be as effective as he wanted to be, right? They just kind of wore down, right? I think that's sort of the general consensus, is that Bill Self, even stated as well at numerous times over the course of last year of like, hey, look, we may have the best starting 5 in the country, but that doesn't matter if those guys are all banged up and, they can't be at their peak effectiveness, right? Because you've had to play them so much over the course of the season. Well, this year, obviously, the narrative was, okay, you've gone out and you've brought in a number of different guys via the transfer portal that you feel like, you can go 7, 8, 9 guys deep this year to where that shouldn't be an issue. Bill Self this year has stated, hey, look, my goal is to get the starters playing 25 to 30 minutes a game, right? To really lower that number.
Yeah.
And this game against K-State, that didn't happen. Hunter Dickinson plays 34 minutes. DeJuan Harris plays 36 minutes. Zeke Mayo plays 35 minutes. Shaquille Moore, 31 minutes. Like, it didn't happen in this game. And I think if KJ Adams is out for an extended period, not just forget about all the conversation about, the defensive floor versus offensive ceiling. Like, set all that aside for a second. Just strictly from the standpoint of, if AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin aren't going to be stepping up enough, suddenly that supposed depth you have is gone. It's completely wiped away. If KJ Adams continues to remain out for an extended period and you're not getting quality production from those guys, you're going to be looking at Hunter Dickinson and saying, hey, look, Hunter, you're going to have to play 36 minutes tonight. That's just how it's going to have to be. You're looking at Zeke Mayo. Hey, you're going to have to play 37 minutes tonight. Same thing with DeJuan Harris. Like now you're starting to get back into the cycle of the sort of what unfolded last year. So that's really what maybe concerns me the most, right? Because let's say KJ Adams is out for 3 weeks, right? Look at what KU is going to have to do over the course of these 3 weeks in terms of their schedule. We talked about it. They've got a very difficult stretch on the horizon where they go Houston, then UCF at home, should win that one. But then you go at Baylor, Iowa State, at Kansas State, right? Like, we just talked about K-State, obviously not very good, but that's going to be the most important game of their season in Manhattan, right? So you're talking about a stretch of games coming up where the intensity level is going to be very high. You're going to be playing against some very quality opponents and against some opponents that are going to be really juiced up for you. And if you don't have KJ Adams, who is A, your energy guy, and B, sort of the linchpin, I think, for your big men in terms of being able to cycle through how you want to with Flory and Hunter and that. And all of a sudden those guys are all going to be playing 36 minutes a game for, 6 games straight or whatever it may be. Like, I have some concerns about that. I have some concerns because now you've just sort of fallen into the trap of exactly what happened to this team down the stretch last season.
Yeah, and look, I know we need to go to a break, but we're not that far removed from a game where Kansas had to play KJ Adams at the 5 because of foul trouble to Hunter Dickinson and Flory Dinga. And yes, all of a sudden KJ's not there. If you wind up being in one of those games that you're talking about, and Hunter Dickinson and Flory get into foul trouble and both pick up fouls, who's your 5 at that point? Things get a little hairy at that point.
We'll continue this conversation on the other side, but of course, I do want to tell you about our friends over at Home Field Apparel. Kevin, I don't know if you noticed, but it is incredibly cold outside. It is really cold, and I am actually wearing right now, you can't see it, I'm not going to stand up and show you, but I'm wearing my KU Home Field Apparel joggers. They're super warm. They keep my legs nice and cozy in these cold winter times. I wish I could put them on my hands and my feet. My hands and feet are cold. I was just want to keep my hands and feet warm, but they're doing the job on my legs and my lower body. So you can find that. They also have pullovers, jackets, and plenty more to keep you warm during these very, very cold upcoming days and weeks here in the middle of January if you're in the Kansas City area. So shop Home Field Apparel. You can use the promo code PAYHEAT24, 15% off your first order. That's PAYHEAT24, 15% off your first order over at homefieldapparel.com. More KU basketball talk is coming up next. Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com. This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. If you like what you are hearing or if you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe, drop a comment, share your thoughts as we are close to 500 subscribers on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, so subscribe over there. If you're listening on the audio side, you can subscribe as well and leave a 5-star rating and review. Spread the word. Tell your friends, family, anybody about us over here as we continue to grow the show here on the Kansas City Sports Network. And thanks so much to everybody that's supported us so far on KCSN. So, Kevin, as I just kind of opined there a little bit about some of my concerns in the short term, necessarily, if KJ Adams continues to be out, where is your concern meter at right now? I mean, we talked about it, right? You and I both predicted, hey, this game against K-State was probably not going to be a blowout. We both suggested it could be, maybe the score might look a little bit closer than what KU fans would feel comfortable with, considering how bad K-State has been this year. But now you're going to try to turn the page on that. Still no KJ Adams. Do you think if KJ Adams is out, Bill Self is going to start to figure some things out? Where are you at right now with KU? Maybe your concern level in the short term and the long term?
Yeah, if guys don't take advantage of this opportunity, it's their fault, right? I mean, because they are going to have chances. And whether you're talking about AJ Storr, whether you're talking about Rylan Griffin or whoever you're talking about, there are minutes to be had, right? And so if you're trying to make your case that, hey, even when KJ Adams comes back, I should be on the court more, this is your chance. And so I think my concern with it, Nick, is just that guys haven't wrested that chance away just yet. And granted, we've had one game without KJ Adams that we've seen, but at the same time, a lot of times we've seen it, and statistically, a lot of times teams play really well their first game when a guy goes out, right? For multiple reasons, I think. One is just, I think the other team isn't entirely sure how you're going to play with them out. And so you have a little bit of element of surprise there. The second one is, I think it's almost emotional, if you will, where a guy looks at it and sees his chance. And, hey, I'm in the starting lineup. I'm not usually in the starting lineup. Or, hey, I'm playing 20 minutes. I'm not usually playing 20 minutes. I'm going to step up in this case and play really well. And where you usually see the deficiency happen from that guy being out is down the road, right? Like it's the next game after that or the game after that where teams are like, okay, this is how Kansas is going to play without KJ Adams. We know we've got tape, we can see how to address that, and that initial sort of adrenaline shot for the player wears off. And the fact that nobody really stepped in to that extent, I think is, I don't want to say alarming, but certainly disappointing, Nick. And when you look at Kansas going into TCU is another team that kind of plays two bigs. Their four is a guy that's 6'7", 245 pounds. And so you're possibly going to be playing a lot of two big lineups again. What's your lineup look like when you aren't? And who's your four? Can you count on that guy to be your four? And the other thing, Nick, is teams play small against bigger lineups. It happens. But your smaller guy has to be more effective than their bigger guy. He has to make them pay in space. He has to space the floor to where you have an advantage there. He has to do certain things to where it's not a one-sided deal where the bigger guy is just taking advantage of you on the glass, and that's what you have to say. And so the other thing about it is, and Self would say this, even if you had KJ Adams, everybody has to rebound. You have to rebound as a team, because KJ Adams was actually for all the knocks on him not rebounding well, he was actually rebounding extremely well right before the injury. He was in one of his better rebounding stretches of his career. I think he had a stretch, was it a year ago, that he had 3 straight games of double digits. That was maybe his best, but he was right around there in terms of how well he was rebounding. And so you need AJ Storr, you need Rylan Griffin, you need even the guards like DeJuan Harris. You need them to get on the glass, and DeJuan did a pretty good job, I thought, against K-State of doing that. The other thing that could help them out just in general, and Hick, is Diggy Coit just making shots, because people, I know people say, hey, what's Diggy doing out there? And the answer is, you're hoping he can come out and hit a shot or two, but I think he's 2 for 20 over his last several games from deep. And so if he's not making those shots with the defensive limitations that he has, with all the other things, that really makes it tough for him to play for any extended minutes. And against K-State, he came out, missed a shot, didn't play extensive minutes. I think he was like a -5 in like 3 minutes.
Yeah, unfortunately for Diggy, my short king, because we gotta support the short king. But unfortunately for Diggy, like, you're right. If he's not a lethal perimeter shooter, unfortunately he beyond that, like, if he's not doing that, you run into a lot of issues with his size, right? You run into a lot of issues with what he can do then beyond that, right? So I think yeah, that's kind of where the analysis starts and ends. like if you are a 40% plus 3-point shooter, then you're going to be able to come out onto the floor and hit shots. And look, that's a very tough role to have, right? I mean, you're talking about a guy who's probably going to be on the bench for, 25 to 30 minutes most nights, and then he's going to be called upon to come straight off the bench and maybe try to hit a couple knockdown shots. Like, that's a very difficult role.
Did you watch the Michael Jordan documentary?
I did, yes. I've actually watched it a couple times.
Yeah, same. The part where Steve Kerr talks about, like, when you're the off the bench sniper guy, like, your role, every shot you take takes on so much importance, because you may only get 3 shots and you make one of them and it's like, oh, this guy's shooting 33%. That's below average. Why is he on the court? You make 2 and it's like, this guy's making 66%. He's amazing. And that's a 1-shot difference. And so when you're coming out there, you're not in the flow of a game and your goal is to come in and immediately, make shots. That is a tough role. Unfortunately, if Diggy wants to see the court, for any extended period of time, it's a role that he's got to do better at than he's doing right now.
Yeah, and I will say, you mentioned the rebounding with KJ Adams, right? I think if you look at the rebounding numbers for this game against K-State, it's probably a little bit of fool's gold. KU out-rebounded K-State by 10, but K-State is not a good rebounding team. They're particularly terrible in giving up offensive rebounds as well. So I think maybe if you look at that and say, well, hey, look, KU rebounded fine without KJ Adams, I would say this game, and specifically against K-State, may have been a little bit of a fool's gold type of game. But one thing I did want to mention also, Kevin, is on the preview show, we talked about this. I personally sort of issued a bit of a challenge to one Hunter Dickinson.
Yes.
And he really answered the call, man. 25.
I think he watched the segment at halftime.
Yeah,
because he was okay in the first half, like scored 8 points. It wasn't like he was bad, but man, that stretch to come out in the second half was as good as he's looked in a Kansas uniform, probably.
Yeah, I believe he had 10 straight points, right, to start the second half or something like that for KU. He was really dominant. Ends up 12 of 19, 25 points, like I said, 8 rebounds for him in the game as well. So he was really impressive. I really love to see that from him. But again, to kind of circle back to what we mentioned before the break earlier, I don't know if you can rely on Hunter to do that game in and game out if you're going to be requiring him to play 35 minutes each night for the next 8 games, right? Like that would be where I would say where I would hit the brakes on that a little bit. But then Zeke Mayo comes in, obviously, and was phenomenal to start the game for KU, finishes with 24 points, 4 of 7 from 3, really quality night for him as well. Those 2 guys clearly are the top 2 scorers for this team, right? And you would love to have Rylan Griffin or AJ Storr be your third guy as a scorer. It hasn't happened yet. Obviously, DeJuan Harris did step up in this particular game for KU against K-State with 15 points as well. But you'd love to have a third scoring option really step up for KU, and it hasn't quite happened yet. But
kudos to Juan Harris for scoring 15 against K-State. I mean, and to your point, I don't think DeJuan is that answer. Like, I don't think that he's the number 3 scorer. But what I was saying is, against K-State, he was sort of that number 3 scoring option, and that helps a lot when he's able to go out there and do it. Ideally, I said this before, I'll say it again, Nick. I think a guy like Rylan Griffin, who we know can defend at a really high level, I would almost like to see more lineups with him at the 4 where you're playing really small around Hunter Dickinson and you're giving Rylan Griffin a chance to space the floor against teams that have a too big lineup, and Rylan Griffin potentially being a guy that is sort of that third scoring threat. One thing about it, though, the last couple games, he's had a couple really nice drive to pass plays as well. And that's not necessarily something that, I knew was really in his bag up to that point. So kudos for that. But yeah, if Rylan Griffin can become a guy that's scoring 10 or 12, fairly consistently, AJ Storr obviously is a guy that at times can really score. It would be great if those two would kind of meld together to become that number 3 scoring option, which is why everybody's wanting those guys to find that level of success.
Yeah, because look, I mean, let's look around the room here. You got Hunter Dickinson and Zeke Mayo. KJ Adams, even when he's healthy, I don't think will be your third scoring option, right? He's definitely more of your energy type of player, even when he's healthy. DeJuan Harris, I think, has proven that in a one-game sample, he could be, but probably not over the course of an extended period of time, be your third scoring option. Shaq Moore is probably in the same boat as DeJuan Harris, I would think, in terms of, maybe you could expect one game where he steps up, but probably not on a consistent basis. Then you have Flory Badunga, who probably probably falls more in the KJ Adams category, where he's more of an energy guy, more of a hustler type, 4-man. And then you start to look around and, okay, now you're down to AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin at that point, right? Well, those two guys, one of them you want to see step up. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. Again, Bill Self had said that KJ Adams could be looking at a week-to-week type of injury. So this is going to be something that KU's probably going to be dealing with for quite some time, right? Where KJ Adams is going to be out of the lineup and or probably not 100% if he does continue to play at any point. So it's a big time, right? And again, I think you're also looking at, I kind of mentioned it earlier in the show, but you're also looking at a stretch for KU that's probably going to determine how serious of a Big 12 title contender the Jayhawks are this year. When you look at next Saturday, the 25th, Houston at home, then you go at home against UCF, a game you should win easily, but then you go at Baylor on Saturday, February 1st, straight into a Monday game at home against Iowa State. Then you go at K-State again, right? Like, I keep saying at K-State, and I understand K-State's bad, but like it's K-State in Manhattan. It's the only game they care about every year. Like, if there's one game for like their sort of final stand, it's going to be that one probably to define their season. But, you look at that stretch, Houston, Baylor, Iowa State. If you can go 2-1 in those 3 games, right? Like, you're probably still in the title race, but if you can't, then you're probably looking at, starting to fade away a little bit, but then the good news is the schedule really does line up for KU after that. And from basically after that February 8th game against K-State until basically the start of March, you go up against Utah, Colorado, BYU, Oklahoma State, and Colorado again. Those teams are all, by the way, at the bottom of the barrel of the conference. So that's the good news for KU. You should have a chance to maybe rack up some wins at that time. But again, I think if you lose multiple of those games against Houston, Baylor, and Iowa State, you might not be able to catch up at that point. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. But I'm looking ahead. I understand all of that because KU does have a game before Houston on Saturday, and that's coming up this Wednesday against TCU. TCU is a bit of an interesting team. They're 10-7. They hadn't really done too much. You look at what they've done in non-conference play. They lost the game against Vanderbilt. They lost against Colorado State in overtime, which was kind of a bad loss. Lost against Santa Clara as well. They didn't really pick up any marquee non-conference wins. They did beat Xavier. That was about it. They come into conference play. They lose against Arizona. They beat K-State by 1 at home. They go and lose against Houston on the road. They beat BYU at home, and then they go and they lose to Utah at home. But then they are coming off of, by far, what I think is their best win of the season, which happened on Sunday, yesterday, and they go and they beat Baylor 74-71 in Waco on the road. So this is a team that you expect is probably going to be coming into this game against Kansas with quite a bit of confidence after their biggest win of the season. I know Jeremy Roach, I think, got hurt in the game for Baylor against TCU, which maybe helped them a little bit, but even still, that's an impressive win regardless. What are you expecting from KU as they head to Waco? And also, shout out to Henry Greenstein, sports editor of the Wall Street Journal World, who pointed out that this is the first time KU in any sporting event is going to be playing in Fort Worth against TCU since March of 2023, because the Big 12 has expanded, so you got these weird schedules. It's been almost 2 years since any KU team has played in Fort Worth against TCU. Quickly, just a quick synopsis. What do you expect of this game for KU?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. TCU, the main thing that they've done well, if you can say that, is the teams don't shoot well from three against TCU generally. And a lot of times people will say, people who pay attention to stats will say that's actually not something you can really control a ton. Like, you can run guys off the 3-point line, but generally speaking, people are going to shoot what they're going to shoot against you. Sometimes it's going to be great. Sometimes it's not going to be great. But 3-point defense is a myth, is one of the big stat things out there, which I don't think is 100% true, but that's a really long way to say that. But they haven't been a great rebounding team, Nick. And then they went up against Baylor and they were excellent on the glass, including on the offensive glass. And a big part of the reason why was old friend alert. Ernest Uday had a terrific game, had 16 points, 15 rebounds. 5 of those were on the offensive end. Also had 4 blocks, I think a steal as well. So Uday coming in on a really high note. Obviously, will be matched up against Hunter Dickinson. I am interested to see if KU winds up going with Flory at the 4 again, risking that whole foul trouble situation that we've talked about, or if KU tries to put somebody like Rylan Griffin or AJ Storr out there at the 4 to try and be maybe a little bit more balanced from that perspective and protect yourself from potential foul trouble. But no, I mean, TCU, they'd been kind of ho-hum for a lot of this year, and then the Baylor game happened, and you're left wondering, is this one of those games that just kind of happens in the Big 12 because you get so beat up by the schedule and different things happen, and then next thing you know, you lose at UCF like KU did last year, like Houston almost lost to UCF this weekend. Same team that Kansas beat by more than 50 points in Orlando almost beat Houston there, and that just kind of tells you the way that the teams kind of go up and down over the course of the schedule. So,
well, then
you find something. Is TCU on track, or was that sort of a one-time thing? The one thing I will say, Nick, is you expect them to play with a lot of confidence coming off of that game.
Well, and you mentioned Iowa State. Iowa State went and lost at West Virginia. Oh, suddenly West Virginia looks like they might be a team that people need to be more concerned about. Obviously, Kansas certainly felt that firsthand with West Virginia beating them at Allen Fieldhouse. So, yeah, that's something that also happened over the weekend as well. And when you look at the TCU team, they are a very average to not great offensive team. 157 in KenPom on offense. They're much better on defense, in the top 30 on defense in KenPom. So this is going to be another game where you're going to have to kind of weigh. I talked about that defensive floor versus offensive ceiling. Like, assuming KJ Adams doesn't play, hey, maybe if you get more of that ceiling level play from AJ Storr, Rylan Griffin, you're able to just kind of score enough points and TCU can't keep up. But if you don't, and it turns into sort of a defensive slugfest where your defensive floor is going to go down a little bit, maybe that gives the edge to TCU. So I don't know. I mean, I have confidence that KU will figure it out in Fort Worth, but I can't say that I'm not somewhat concerned. I mean, I know with what Kansas has done on the road recently, they got that big win against UCF. They did obviously go and lose against Iowa State. They beat Cincinnati on the road too, but are they fixed on the road? I don't know. Maybe this game might help determine that. Give me a game prediction player to watch for this game.
Yeah, I like Kansas to win this one. I think it's probably going to be a fairly close game, though. And if you're Kansas, you're really hoping TCU doesn't make shots because TCU does not typically make shots. And so TCU's not great offensively overall. You look at their, I think, 237th in the country in effective field goal percentage. They take care of the ball kind of okay. The offensive rebound kind of okay. They don't really get to the free throw line a ton. Like, they're not bad at it, but they're kind of average at it. And when they get to the free throw line, they're one of the worst free throw shooting teams in the country. So, they're offensively, there's not a lot to like about TCU, but that's one of those things where if you come out with confidence, you make some shots and things like that, TCU could be fairly dangerous from that regard. I still like Kansas to win this one. I think it's probably going to be a game that for Kansas skews a little bit more offensive than defensive again, because while TCU isn't great offensively, I don't think KU's got the defense solved. And I think you saw that against a very average to bad offensive team in K-State. And so I think Kansas wins this game, maybe something like 75-71. How about, or I guess I have to pick a player too, right?
Yeah. Player to watch.
Player to watch. I'll go with Rylan Griffin just because I think he didn't look like himself against K-State. And so I would be interested to see if there is kind of a bounce back there. And if there is, maybe Kansas is starting to find some answers in terms of, hey, this is how we can handle this, when KJ Adams is out, but also when KJ Adams comes back, here's a guy that can help us. So I'll say Rylan Griffin. How about you?
Yeah, look, the K-State game, I guess prior to knowing for sure that KJ Adams was out, I thought it would be a much more lower scoring game, which it ended up not being, obviously. Look, as bad as K-State is, and as much as we like to mock them and say that they're terrible and whatnot, their offensive ranking on KenPom is about 50 spots higher than TCU. Yeah. K-State's around 110. TCU's at 157. So put that in perspective a little bit. So I do think I kind of lean with you here, Kevin. But again, as you said, with TCU's offense, like I think early in the game will probably determine just how close of a game it's going to be, because if TCU comes out early and is able to hit some shots, maybe and kind of snowball things a little bit offensively, this could be a much tighter game in which KU may need to sweat it out a little bit more. But if they come out and are struggling to hit shots early, I think KU should be okay. I'm going to pick Kansas. I'm going to go 76-69. I think Kansas wins in this one. I think, I don't know, we'll see, but I'm kind of expecting more of the same, honestly, from what we saw against K-State, which is, but the difference is that you're on the road, right? So you hope that you can get another sort of offensive explosion at some point from Zeke Mayo and or Hunter Dickinson that kind of help, which is really what helped propel you against K-State, right? You think about, I mean, if you take away the first, for 36 minutes, K-State outscored KU. It was 14-0 4 minutes into the game, but from then on, K-State outscored them. So if you don't get that hot start again, or you don't get that scoring burst at some point in the game, if you're KU, this could also be a close game. But I will go with Kansas. I think they'll find a way to get it done on the road and set themselves up for a big-time matchup on Saturday against Houston. In terms of a player to watch for me, gosh, I really want to go with Flory again, just because I like Flory, and I think he's going to be a player to watch for me, both positively and negatively, right? Because if he ends up starting with Hunter Dickinson, I think that could be really fun, and he could be somebody that could really benefit from that. But if he gets into foul trouble at any point in the game, really, that's going to be something to keep an eye on as well, to where KU then may really have to shuffle their lineups to some sort of super small ball, like you mentioned earlier in the show. So Flory Badunga will be my player to watch for the game against TCU. That is Wednesday night, by the way. It's a 6:00 game, which is nice, right? I think everyone agrees that the midweek 6 p.m. time slot is better than the 8 p.m. time slot where you have to stay up late during the middle of the week. So should be looking forward to that one. Should be a fun one before they do welcome Houston down Fieldhouse next Saturday. Kevin, you got anything else for the good listeners of the show before we wrap it up here?
Just real quick, at the K-State game was a huge recruiting weekend for the football team too. It was junior day. They had, felt like pretty much all the top players in the state. There were a couple guys missing, but not very many. Don't be surprised if that leads to another commitment, 2 or 3 from some of those guys. So keep an eye on the KU football program and some of the guys that they're recruiting, because they are off to a really hot start right now, Nate.
Yep, they continue to build momentum in the in-state class of 2026, which is great to see, right? You love keeping those in-state kids in Lawrence or bringing them to Lawrence, I guess. So that's very exciting as well. And like Kevin said, maybe keep an eye on that throughout the week also. Also wanted to give a shout-out to Kansas City Chiefs, baby. They are advancing to the AFC title game. Listen, if you love the Chiefs and you're on KCSN, you probably already know this, but if for whatever reason you don't, KCSN has incredible Kansas City Chiefs coverage, live post-game shows all throughout the week. You can see tons of great content regarding the Kansas City Chiefs on KCSN. Certainly, like I said, if you're on KCSN, you probably already know that, but if for whatever reason you're just here for KU and you also happen to like the Chiefs, be sure to check out the KCSN Chiefs coverage as well. But until then, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again later in the week as we'll be gearing up for that game against Houston coming up on Saturday. So we'll talk to you again soon. See ya.